It only took 12 minutes. 12 minutes for their entire world to turn to ash. The night sky over East Los Angeles blazed red and orange as flames devoured the small, run-down house. Smoke choked the air, curling like black serpents into the heavens. Sirens howled in the distance, far too late. Inside the inferno, two brothers, Rami, 14, and Zion, just 12, stumbled out through a shattered window, coughing, their faces streaked with soot and tears. Zion screamed for his mother, but there was no answer, just the sound of splintering wood and the hungry roar of fire. They stood in the middle of the street, barefoot and trembling. Rami's hand clutched his little brother's like a vice. Behind them, the roof caved in with a final groan, sparks shooting skyward like dying stars. In slow motion, we see the boys silhouetted against the flames, their lives collapsing behind them. Sirens flashed. Neighbors watched in stunned silence. But no one moved, no one stepped forward. Cut to black. Homeless, alone, forgotten. They were the children of Syrian immigrants who came to America chasing a dream too fragile for the world they entered. Their parents worked 12-hour shifts at gas stations and cleaning offices. They couldn't afford much, but they managed to keep their sons fed and clothed, a roof over their heads, until that night. Zion, always the quiet one, had big dreams of becoming a cartoonist. His notebooks, filled with doodles of imaginary heroes, were lost in the fire. Rami, the older one, wore his strength like armor. He had a hard stare and a quicker temper, but he cried that night when no one was watching. The system failed them immediately. No paperwork, no known relatives. The shelters were full. On the first night, they slept inside a 24-hour bus station. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as strangers shuffled by, eyes fixed forward. No one asked questions. No one offered a hand. By the third day, hunger turned Rami desperate. He stole 2 sandwiches from a gas station while Zion waited outside. He got tackled by the clerk. Zion watched from the corner of the lot, frozen, as his brother got punched twice before he broke free and ran. They didn't go back there again. By the end of the week, Zion had a fever. He vomited what little food they had. His lips were cracked, his eyes dim. Rami tried begging outside a CVS for medicine, but people just stepped around him like he was part of the pavement. Nights were cruel. They took shelter under a freeway overpass, their thin jackets soaked from the rain. Rami lit scraps of paper in a metal trash can to keep them warm. The flames danced weakly, barely holding back the darkness. During the day, they wandered the streets. Zion's shoes fell apart. Rami walked into stores pretending to browse, stealing socks and granola. Bars when he could. Once, a woman took a picture of them and uploaded it to her social media, hashtagging it with Thaich Hopley. But no help came. They found a homeless encampment near the edge of Skid Row and thought they'd found safety. But the older men there didn't, like kids. One of them shoved Rami into the mud, called him a rat, and told them to disappear. Zion cried that night, curled into his brother's arms, asking why no one cared. Rami didn't have an answer. For days they wandered. Their stomachs gnawed at them from the inside. They drank from a broken fountain behind an abandoned store. Zion barely spoke now. His face was pale, lips dry. He had stopped sketching in the air with his finger, a habit he had since he was a toddler. That scared Rami more than anything. One cold morning, they huddled near a parking garage, crouched behind a dumpster. The sun rose slowly, casting gold across the cracked concrete. That's when they saw him. A tall man in a worn army jacket, with a long scar running from his right temple down to his cheekbone. Gray stubble coated his jaw. He moved like someone who had seen war and made peace with it. He didn't say anything. He looked right at them, then reached into his coat and tossed something through the air. An apple. It landed near Rami's foot. The man walked away without a word. Rami stared after him, unsure whether it was a trick. Zayan picked up the apple and took a bite without asking. Rami let him. The next day the man was back. This time he left a sandwich and a bottle of water. Said nothing. Just placed it down, nodded once, and vanished down the alley. Rami didn't trust him. Zayan did. The man kept returning, sometimes in the morning, sometimes just after dusk. Each time he left something: food, socks, a small flashlight. He never asked questions, never asked their names. But he watched them with eyes that weren't just seeing them. He was studying them. One evening, as the city lights blinked to life in the distance, Zayan whispered, "I think he's an angel." Rami scoffed. "Angels don't have scars like that." But he looked at the apple in Zayan's hands, and for the first time in weeks his jaw unclenched. He didn't know who the man was, or why he cared. But something in Rami's gut told him this wasn't just another stranger walking by. This man was different, and deep down, a flicker of hope, weak like a dying ember, started to burn, cut to black. Who was he, and why did he care? Caleb finally spoke after a week of silence. His voice was gravel, cracked by years of wind and war. "I live in the woods. I won't hurt you. Come if you want, or stay here and die." Rami stepped forward, instinctively shielding Zayan. "Why would you care?" But Zayan's body trembled like a twig in the wind. His eyes, rimmed red with fever, pleaded silently. He couldn't survive much longer, and so, with hesitant feet and heavy hearts, the boys followed the scarred stranger. The drive out of the city felt like falling through time. The city faded, replaced by winding roads and towering pines. Civilization vanished behind them like a bad dream. No cell towers, no power lines, just raw wilderness. The truck rattled up an unmarked dirt, rode into the heart of the Angeles National Forest. Deer scattered in the trees. Ravens screamed from above. Rami kept glancing at the door handle, his fingers twitching. Zayan slept curled up in the back seat, a blanket wrapped around his small frame. Finally they stopped at a small wooden cabin, half swallowed by the forest. It was sturdy but aged, surrounded by stacked firewood, a rusted satellite dish, and an old metal rain barrel. No signs of life but the quiet hum of wind through the trees. This was no rescue mission. This was exile. The first morning, frost coated the windows. The fire had gone out. Rami woke shivering, eyes scanning the corners of the cabin. Caleb was already outside, splitting logs with one arm and a rusted axe. Rami watched from behind the curtains, his fists clenched. "What does he want?" he hissed. "No one helps for free." Caleb didn't push them. He barely spoke. But he left work for them. Chop kindling, clean rainwater filters, boil rice, wash clothes in the stream. He gave no lectures, no rules, just expectations. Zayan obeyed, without question. He was too tired to fight. But Rami simmered like an untended pot. "I don't trust him," Rami whispered one night. "He could be anyone." Zayan looked over, his voice dry but steady. "He gave us blankets." "So? And food." "Yeah, so did the shelter once, and they tried to separate us." "He hasn't done that." Silence. Caleb continued his quiet routine, letting the woods speak for him. In the evenings, he carved shapes into blocks of cedar, animals, birds, a boy with a slingshot, his rough hands moving with surprising tenderness. Zion watched, mesmerized. One afternoon, Caleb handed him a knife and a chunk of wood. "Try." The bond formed in silence. In shared solitude, Rami remained cold, but the cold didn't care. Nights in the forest were nothing like the city. Out here, the dark was alive, full of creaks, whispers, howls. One night, Zion jolted awake, clutching Rami. "Something's outside." Footsteps crunched on the porch, a guttural yip, followed by scratching at the door. Rami grabbed the rusted poker from the fireplace. Zion locked the bolt just in time. A chorus of yips rose from the tree line. Coyotes. Dozens. Rami froze, trembling. Then, bang. A single gunshot shattered the night. Caleb stood outside in the moonlight, his rifle steady. One warning shot, one command. The coyotes scattered. Rami stared out the window, heart hammering. He wasn't the only one afraid anymore. The next day, Caleb took them deep into the woods. Tread light, eyes open. He taught them how to track animals. Deer, prints, rabbit droppings, broken branches. How to find dry kindling under wet leaves. How to scare off predators without wasting bullets. Zion listened like a sponge. Rami followed at a distance, arms crossed, suspicion still burning beneath the surface. That night, after Caleb went to bed, Rami snooped. He couldn't help it. He needed something. Proof. A reason. In a dusty metal box beneath the bed, he found it. A photo. A younger Caleb, no scar yet, wearing desert camo, standing beside a laughing boy with dark curly hair, maybe 8 or 9. They held up a fish together. The boy's smile was electric. Rami stared. Caleb's voice startled him from behind. "Put it back." Rami turned, the photo trembling in his hand. "Who is he?" he demanded. Caleb didn't flinch. He walked over slowly, took the photo, and sat. "My son." A long silence passed. "He died overseas, with his mother. I was deployed, missed the funeral, missed everything." Rami said nothing, just stood there, the storm inside him finally stilled. "I failed him," Caleb added, softer now. "And I failed myself, but maybe I don't have to fail again." The fire crackled, and for the first time Rami sat beside him. They didn't talk more. They didn't need to. The next week changed everything. Rami started waking early, helping Caleb split logs. Zion smiled again, carving birds into bark and hanging them from the porch beams. The cabin felt safe, like it had roots. One evening, the quiet broke. A burst of static erupted from the battered emergency radio on the shelf. They hadn't heard it work in weeks. Caleb rushed in, tuning the dial. The voice was broken, buried in crackle and snow, but the words were clear enough. Looters spotted near forest boundary, moving through unguarded cabins. Take what you can. Rami's stomach turned. Caleb stood, rifle in hand. It's begun. He locked the door, boarded the windows, showed the boys how to hide in the root cellar if needed. Zion sat on the floor, staring at the door. Outside, the wind picked up. Branches rattled, and somewhere far beyond the trees, footsteps, faint, measured, coming closer. Cut to black. The night came down hard, the kind that eats firelight, muffles sound, swallows breath. Inside the cabin, the boys sat near the hearth, the old radio silent again, as if even it knew what was coming. Caleb moved like a man who had danced with danger before. He didn't speak, just lit a lantern, checked the bolt on the rifle, and nodded once at Rami. "Cellar," he whispered. Zayan was already halfway there, eyes wide, clutching his sketchbook like a shield. But Rami didn't move. He stood by the window, staring out into the dark, and then the shadows moved. 3 of them, men. One held a tire iron. Another dragged a piece of rebar wrapped in barbed wire. The third, the biggest, carried a knife longer than his forearm. No words, no warning. A boot crashed against the front door. Caleb stepped forward. "Don't do this," he shouted. "You've got nothing to steal but regret." Laughter. Then, the door splintered open. Chaos erupted. The first man lunged. Caleb fired a shot, missed, and was tackled. Wood cracked under their weight. Rami grabbed the fireplace shovel and swung wildly. The heavy metal hit bone with a sickening crunch. One attacker went down, screaming. The barbed wire swung, sliced across Rami's arm. He yelled but didn't fall. Zayan crouched under the floorboards, frozen, clutching his knees, trying to stay invisible. The knife wielder cornered Caleb, who was bleeding from a slash on his ribs. They grappled, slammed into the kitchen table, overturned it. Caleb's military training kicked in, elbow to the throat, knee to the gut. But age slowed him. The blade sank into Caleb's shoulder. Rami screamed, grabbed the rifle. He didn't shoot. He threw it. The rifle hit the attacker just hard enough to knock his grip loose. Caleb twisted, disarmed him, and with a final, brutal blow, ended it. Silence. The air stank of sweat, blood, fear, and firewood. Rami stood panting, holding the shattered shovel. Zayan crawled out, eyes wet, voice trembling. "You're not allowed to die, too," he whispered. Caleb, soaked in blood, but still upright, managed a crooked smile. That wasn't the plan. They spent the rest of the night tending wounds, dragging bodies out, locking the doors. At dawn, police finally came, late as always. The officers swept the cabin, asked questions, took statements. The attackers had been part of a roving gang, hitting empty forest homes. The boys were lucky, they said. Caleb was a hero. He didn't care. When they offered a commendation, a news interview, a handshake, he turned away. I did what had to be done. But the boys, they couldn't remain invisible anymore. Social services showed up with neatly combed hair and clipboards. "We'll find a place for them," one said. "They're minors. They need supervision." Rami stepped forward. "We're not going back into that system." The woman frowned. "It's not your choice, son." "It is," came Caleb's voice. He limped out of the cabin with his shoulders square and voice firm. "They're under my care. Mr. Boone, you're not a registered guardian. You'd have to file paperwork, background checks." "I will," he cut in. "I've got the contacts. I've got the history. You want someone to vouch for me? Check my service record." He stood taller, bloodied but unbowed. "You think this is charity?" he said, pointing to the boys. "This is family." He didn't wait for approval. He filed the paperwork the next day. It took weeks. Old military friends wrote letters. A retired judge remembered Caleb's work after the floods in '09. The caseworker wavered, then, finally, relented. Temporary. Guardianship was granted. Caleb signed the forms with a hand still bandaged. The boys didn't say, "Thank you." They just stayed, because saying thank you felt too small. Weeks became months. Zayan went back to school. He barely spoke in class, but he drew constantly. Wolves, forests, fire. And finally, 2 boys walking out of flames, holding hands. It won him a regional art contest. The judges cried. Rami stayed home. He helped Caleb repair the cabin, built a greenhouse using scrap glass and scavenged lumber. They sold vegetables to hikers who wandered nearby. Nothing big, nothing flashy, but it kept them afloat. Caleb stopped sleeping with the rifle beside him. Zion started whistling when he carved. Rami laughed sometimes. It wasn't perfect. They still had nightmares. Zion still flinched at sirens. Rami still carried a scar on his arm and on his soul, but they weren't running anymore. They weren't alone. One night, months later, they sat around a campfire in the clearing behind the cabin. The stars were sharp and endless above. Zion leaned against Caleb, eyes half closed. Rami stared into the fire, silent. Then, softly, he asked, "Why did you really help us?" Caleb didn't look up, just poked at the embers. "Because someone should have helped my son." Silence fell again. But it wasn't heavy. It was whole. Zion reached up and placed his small hand on Caleb's. Rami said nothing for a long time. Then, so softly it was almost a whisper, he said, "He would have been proud." The fire crackled. On in the distance, a coyote howled. Not a threat this time, just a song to the night. And inside the circle of light, 3 survivors sat together. Not by blood, not by fate, but by choice. A choice that saved them all. Cut to black. Cue soft piano music. Distant forest sounds. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances, in quiet heroes, in the power of choosing love over fear, then share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe. Because out there, in a world so quick to forget, someone might still be waiting for a reason to hope.